Oh, how's it going? So, we're in the last stanzas. Let's try to get through this. So, I'll break these up into lines of two because they fit pretty well. So the next two lines are: if you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings, nor lose the common touch. Now, there are two sides of the coin here. Let's talk about the first. If you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue. So here he's saying, be in touch with the common man, the working class. This is a very British thing, the working class versus the middle class or the upper class. Like they're much more rigidly defined. I think they're blurring a little bit, but you can definitely tell people when they're working class um, or middle class. And if they own up to it, then it's a little bit more tolerable. But some people like to pretend that they're upper class or middle class when they're not. There's a show in England that was back in the 90s called Keeping Up Appearances, where this woman comes from a fairly working class background, but she's constantly embarrassed by her sisters who are very crass. Her brother-in-law, who looks like crap, he comes from Liverpool, which is known as an extremely working class. He's actually a lot more sophisticated than she is, and she likes to pretend that she's something that she's not. And so that's kind of it's a comedy based on these class issues. On the other hand, you do have people who try to pretend they're working class because you get a little bit more credibility that you've had a hard time. You get a little bit more of a break, and it's obvious that they've never worked a day in their life. So anyway, obviously, in some ways, the working class. This is true in America as well, but it's a lot more blurred. The working class, they tend to be more honest. They put on airs less. They pretend less, not as wrapped up in appearances as much, and tend to be more in touch with reality, mostly because they can't afford to hide from reality, put themselves in an ivory tower, and delude themselves into thinking that there's something more than an animal. But on the other hand, life in a crowd can be crude. I don't know if you've ever lived in a poor neighborhood or a city that has a lot of crime. Um, Life there might not be as virtuous. Working class tend to do a little bit more. That's not everybody, but instead, like the poverty tends to lead to crime, largely out of necessity or at desperation. So they might end up doing more unsavory things, saying more unsavory things, have a less shame about having public spats. Um, they end up doing these things in order to survive mentally, financially. You might be more likely to steal if you need the money. You might be more likely to drink yourself into oblivion if you just feel desperation. And that tends to be, there's an old saying that I think Oscar Wilde inverted it, that work is the curse of the drinking class. Well, the thing is that you need something to look forward to. And sometimes it's just getting bombed out of your mind. I think a lot of people have been there, no matter what class they are, but that it's not so much about having fun or worrying about money. It's more about, um, it's desperation. It's hiding from your problem. So the thing is, like, he's saying that find a way to live amongst the working class. Be one of them. At least the good parts of them, the honest parts, the down to earth parts. They're really just much more honest with each other. Um, they don't hide their feelings as much. Um, they don't live in a fantasy world. They're in touch with reality. That's the good part. Be that. Yet, don't do anything that would be considered vice. Don't do drugs. Don't commit crime. Don't gossip. Although rich people do gossip like hell. Uh, don't live in a dingy environment. Even if you have sort of modest means, make your home a castle as much as you can. You know, clean. Sometimes it does make you feel better if you just clean. Um, and some of these characteristics of the working class are very noble, as I said. Just honesty, showing what they mean to you, rather than just keeping them at a distance. But some of them are really vicious characteristics. And some of it, and like I said, it's largely out of laziness or desperation, um, and which forces them into a state of nature. Now, there's a Hobbes quote that I've selected here. Kind of triggers that. It said that the people in the working class are exposed to the vicissitudes, like the highs and lows of stability in life, because they lose their job and that's it. They're wiped out. And it reminded me of a Hobbes quote. It's a famous one, but it's a larger block. The end of it you might recognize. It says, "Whatsoever therefore is consequence to a time of war." So being in a time of war, life in the working class is sort of like being in a war with reality and finances, where every man is an enemy to every man. Sometimes that's the way it is. And when crime happens, you're an enemy to each other. The same consequence to the time, obviously this is in the 1600s, wherein men without security, right, working class are very insecure in their financial situation, then want in their own strength and their own invention shall furnish them with all. The thing is that people, it's not you when you're in a state of war, you're in this working class mentality, you sometimes you have to steal rather than invent, because it's just there's no incentive for you to invent. In such condition, there is no place for industry, because the fruit thereof is uncertain. There's no point in investing in something if it's just not going to work out. This is why a lot of African and South American countries don't have legitimate businesses, because you build a business, the government can just take it away, or a war could come in and wipe you out. So you just don't bother. Consequently, no culture of the earth, no navigation, no use of the commodities that may be imported by sea, no commodious building, no instruments of moving and removing things, such things as require much force, no knowledge of the face of the earth, no account of time, no arts, no letters, no society, and which is worst of all, continual fear and danger of violent death. The thing is that being in this state, you don't do higher level things. You don't do art. You don't do, literature. You don't have a culture society. You have just basically people living in the same place. And it's not a civilization. It's just because you don't bother, because you're constantly worried about where's my next meal coming from, rather than writing a masterpiece. Sorry, there's garbage going on, the garbage collection outside. So, the life of a man, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. So the thing is that the working class are sometimes exposed to this state of war. Now, the second part of this selection I've done from Rudyard Kipling is, "Or walk with kings, nor lose the common touch." So likewise, while you can be rarely in touch with the working class, keep some of the good qualities, forget about the bad ones. Now, on the other hand, you have to learn to ennoble yourself, in a sense of, you learn to speak properly, how to treat others, learn how the world works, and not just on a very immediate sense, but sort of a higher level thinking. And then even in some of it's like learning etiquette. It might seem silly to address, "Oh, Your Majesty," etc. The thing is, it's a form of social lubricant. It's a signal that says to other people, I know how to behave in this environment. And they'll trust you because you basically have displayed a knowledge of how to behave, and that you are not going to do anything crazy. That you know how to live in this higher level world. Now, going beyond what Hobbes said and what I read to you, life beyond worrying about the dangers of life as a working class, if you can you find a way out of that, life tends to have a little bit more of a more beautiful tint to it, because you can talk about art, these higher level things that Hobbes said you just don't have time for. You can talk about literature. You can talk about society. You don't have to live in fear. You don't have to worry about a violent death, or being alone, or being poor, or having a short life. life, once you can get past that, is a lot more pleasant. Um, and the further past you get it, the more pleasant it is, you know. But the thing is, that's a little bit. You can talk about these things. You can talk about art and that, and you might be able to talk with higher, people who have higher education. But that education is not just there for vanity. Um, this is going back to one of those previous things, not to talk too wise, in the sense of you can use this education, higher level things, walking with kings, to appreciate life and beauty, and and things beyond your own nose. And it does make life better. Don't pretend to be something that you're not. I mean, you're not a king, you're not a noble, probably. You're not even rich. Don't develop rich man's habits like spending a ton of money on nothing. Um, and I would say don't try to make other people know that you're better than them, because you're not. Ultimately, the Queen of England is no better a person than some guy living in a council flat, in Manchester or wherever, some working class town. Um, and this is more of a religious tint, is that that we're all sort of equal in the eyes of God, and if you want to talk about like a more universal sense, that we're all human beings, whether we're kings or we're just beggars. But the life of a queen is better than the life of a king. Just she doesn't have to worry about where her next meal is coming from, whether somebody's going to rob her and then possibly kill her and take all her food. She's old, right? So she's weak. She has people to protect her and look after her, and I don't know if she can still bathe, but she's getting quite old. The thing is that you can take the positive of walking with kings while leaving the negative of thinking that you're better. Um, because when you do that, when you think you're better and you sort of look down on others, you just end up looking silly and just pretentious. There's you just condescend to people. There's a quote, sort of a jokey quote, saying condescending means to talk down to others, which is I've always found funny. So when you get out of that, when you go talk with kings and you sort of live amongst them, you kind of lose touch with the sense of reality that only the poor and the working class have. That that life is very, we're hanging on a thread in the working class, and if you can get past a lot of that immediate problems, like how the hell am I going to pay my bills this month? I feel a little bit better. But you understand in the back of your mind that this could all be taken away by fate or God or, the tax agency or whatever. And you can devote yourself to higher level things, but keep that in mind. Likewise, like rich people should have some kind of contact with lower, like working class mentality, because I think there's a lot in it that they could get benefit from. Okay, that's all. Almost there. If you made it this far, you might as well stay to the end. All right. Bye.